Okay, so for the next chunk of time, there's kind of three things I was thinking we would do related to this. I thought we would talk a bit about how to get ready to speak, what to do the day that you're speaking, and then how to actually speak. So I'm assuming that a lot of you have already kind of done probably some quite a bit and some not very much public speaking, but I would ask you to ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? What's the thing that you most worry about when you're going to talk? And it might be this, right? I know that used to be my biggest worry. And I would call your attention to this guy over here. He makes me think of a story that I heard from one of my colleagues once, that when he was in his first year neuroanatomy class, he was in the fourth row, I guess, and the student next to him fell asleep. And the neuroanatomy instructor, who was boring as you can imagine, pointed to my friend and said, "You there, wake him up." And my friend said, "No, sir, that's your job to keep us awake." I wouldn't have had that presence of mind, but that is your job. Your job when you're speaking is to engage, and if you do that properly, you won't have to worry too much about that. So the first rule of this is to know to whom you're speaking. When I walked into the room a few minutes ago and you asked me a question, I didn't know any context of the question, so it's okay to kind of back up and try to find out who it is you're talking to. And I would say there's a couple of tricks for that. The first is to start by asking your host ahead of time, who am I talking to? Go ahead and ask them. Are they community people? Are they business leaders? Are they people that already care about this? Are they the opposition sometimes? Are they clinicians? You need to know some about to whom you're speaking. You need to know some of where they're coming from, what their point of view is. And then lastly, you need to really kind of ask your host, well, why did you have me here? What's the reason? Is there something specific? Is there some goal you have? And then research the place you're going to talk to. Look at their website. That little About Us page is very interesting, and their Facebook, their social media presence. Find out who else they've had speak there. And maybe the place you're going to has other chapters, and if you do a good job, they'll invite you to speak elsewhere. So I want to tell you a little bit, maybe too much personal here, about comfort zones, and here's definitely not my comfort zone. My wife makes really cool jewelry and makes really cool parts for her jewelry, and oftentimes those parts require other beads. So she likes to go into bead stores, and this is a bead store, in case you're not familiar with it, in case you've managed to avoid these places. But I get crazy when I go in there. It makes me there's so many little parts. It's not my deal. But I happily go. But that's not for me. But what I do really like are necklaces. I like strands of beads. So this is a fairly simple one. It's one theme, but it goes all the way through, and yet it's got some variation. And I like ones like this that are sort of more crunchy. So I like I like necklaces. I like artwork, but the parts can drive me just crazy. So I know my personal comfort zones, and that takes me to my first of a few models about how people think, which really influences how I speak when I'm speaking, or how I try to speak when I'm speaking public. And this one's a model from a guy named Manny Elkind, and he says we all have one of four comfort zones in our head, and of course we all have all four, but we have one that we tend to prefer the most, and maybe two. So one of them is facts. There's some of us who we need the facts, man. You're going to tell me something, we need to know the facts about what you're telling me. There's another group that it's not really so much the facts. I need to know, well, how are you going to do it? What's the process? How are you going to regulate it? What's the methodology? If I don't know that you actually have a nuts and bolts way to do it, I don't really believe it. There's another group that's all fine and good for, but I have to know where you're going. You need to pull me in. You need to lead me along to a better world. And if I'm not seeing the better world, I don't get why we would care about it. And then there's another group for whom it's really all about the feelings. If you haven't put a human face on this story, I can't relate to it until there's a person, until there's a really piece of humanity here. And of course, we all have parts of all of this. I would say the first thing to do when you're going into this sort of a venue or of a venture is to really introspect a bit, or you can go to Manny Elkind's website. There's some self-assessment tools, but really figure out which quadrant you're the most comfortable in, because it's a trap that you can wind up spending all of your time there when you're speaking, or you can spend all of your time there answering questions. So if somebody asks you a question, you're giving your little talk, and then somebody at the back at the end, stands up and says, hey, that's all fine and good, but my uncle, he was on the waiting list in Canada for back surgery, and they made him wait so long, he had a heart attack and he died. So, you're going to tell me you want to do this when my uncle died because they have that system? Well, this was early in my speaking venues here or process, and I responded by saying, well, actually the waiting list in Canada shows, well, the life expectancy in Canada. I responded with facts. They were coming from the feelings quadrant, and it was like I was speaking Mandarin Chinese and they were speaking, a different language, and they, was completely the wrong answer. So you want to try to figure out, when you're talking to an individual, the first thing you want to do is really listen to them. And frankly, this may sound kind of rude, but frankly, pretty quickly in a conversation, as a physician, we're trained pretty quickly in a conversation to figure out, to come up with our diagnosis and our plan. And then the rest of the first several minutes is sort of getting them a chance to talk and to explain things more. And maybe you'll learn more, but you're kind of got to figure it out at the beginning. And the same thing is often the case when people are asking you a question, when you're a public speaker. They'll want to tell you a story, or they'll have some longer version of the question, and you'll have already figured out the question and the answer before they're anywhere near done. Don't ever, unless you have to, because if they go on for like 10 minutes, interrupt. But try really hard not to interrupt. And instead, one of the things I do when people are asking me a question like that is I try to think, which of these 4 quadrants is the question coming from? And I try to make sure that the answer that I'm picking for their question resides primarily in that quadrant. So when you're talking one-on-one, try to figure out which quadrant you have to belong in, and don't respond to, and likewise, if somebody brings up, something about the economics of Medicare for all, and they're in the facts quadrant, and you respond with but people are dying. I've got my uncle died. If you respond with that, you're again in the wrong quadrant, and they won't hear you. So if you're doing if you're answering a question, you're having a private conversation, spend some time really actually pigeonholing the preferred quadrant. And if you're talking to a group, and this is more aspirational for me, I'm not as good at it as I want to be. If you're talking to a group, if you have 10, 20, 100, 200, 500, tens of thousands, if you have a group of people, you're going to have people from all 4 quadrants in your group. So I know which quadrant I'm the most comfortable in, but I force myself to roll around the quadrants. Sometimes I'll even look at my slides, and I'll lay them out, or people will do this on paper and lay them out on a table, and try to think, well, I know I'm usually weak on the feelings slides, and it is, when a speaker starts talking about the anecdotal stories, I get all antsy because I know they're trying to manipulate me, and I hate that quadrant. I hate that. I'm fine with universal, but when a speaker does that, I hate it. So I know my bias is to not put that in very much. So I'll look at my slides and I'll go, hey, there's about a 15-minute period where there wasn't a human face on this even remotely. And I'll make a point to think, well, I've got an anecdote. Well, I've got a story that really fits. I need to, so I try, it's aspirational somewhat, but I try when I'm speaking in public, I try to roll around these 4 quadrants as much as I can, rather than staying in the one that I'm the most particularly comfortable with. Think about your story arc. It turns out they've done all sorts of studies on memory recall. And it turns out that at the beginning and at the end of your talk, that's what people will remember the most. They'll remember how you opened, and they'll remember how you closed. And the stuff in the middle, might be kind of murkier, might not be as recalled. And that's actually called a primacy effect at the beginning and a recency effect at the end. So in the middle, that's where I think it's really important to kind of do the quadrant rolling process, to try to boost up memory. So how do you design a story arc? I'd say that there's 4 4 sections to a story when you're trying to build a presentation. And again, you're trying to build a piece of jewelry. You're trying not to just take a bucket of beads and spill it out on the table for a mumble jumble. You're trying to actually string it together into a story that drives from the beginning to the end. So first, of course, guess what, is the opening, the beginning, and you want to do that in some way that engages. So there's a lot of ways to do that. You want to try to briefly establish your credibility. Why should I listen to you? Who are you? Why should I be listening to you? You want to try to maybe activate the nurturing part of somebody's brain. You know, we talked about that last time and the time before with George Lakoff. Sometimes it's really good to tell a story at the beginning, very short, that activates sort of the nurturing part of the brain, and ask permission. You know, oftentimes I'll say, I forgot to do it today, but I would say, well, here's the 3 things that I'm planning to kind of run through, and then I would quickly say, is that kind of what you were expecting me to talk about? Is that kind of, is that what you wanted to hear? Is that why you came here? So ask permission at the end of sketching out the agenda, basically. And then spell out the problem. And I like to go back to a friend of mine who worked briefly for Nat Geo when they first started doing Shark Week. And you all know Shark Week, right? Well, the first time they did Shark Week, the ratings went through the roof. And the next day after the first session, the CEO, I think it was, came into the brainstorming room and wrote this sentence on the board: the more ferocious the predator, the higher the ratings. The more ferocious the predator, the higher the ratings. So that's the first part of the problem statement is Shark Week. You're trying to, but the good news now compared to 10 years ago when we were talking about Medicare for All is the sharks are all over the place. People know the system is on fire more than they ever used to. So you don't have to go too crazy on that. When you're spelling out the problems, you don't want to spell out 300 problems. You want to limit yourself to no more than 3 issues. And if it's a very short talk, 1 issue. And then when you're doing the problem statement, you want to try to hit all 4 quadrants. In terms of the solution, I have a dream, right? I think we talked about this before. Martin Luther King didn't say, I have a plan. He said, I have a dream. And I have a plan doesn't motivate as much as I have a dream. So you want a plan, but your solutions have to be motivational. They have to be inspirational. And the granular detail is something to keep in your pocket, really. Don't do a deep dive into it. But yet you also want to have a roadmap. The solutions have to be within line of sight, have to be achievable. I would recommend not spending too much time in your presentation on why we can't do this. Well, who opposes this? What does the other side say? That makes you vulnerable to being accused of having like a one-sided presentation, but I think that's okay. They get the other side all the time. So I usually try to save the obstacles and how to address the obstacles more for the Q&A portion of the session. And then, here it goes again. And then lastly, of course, you need a call to action. So I like thinking about the idea that sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. Good music will have all of these voices, and sopranos will sing one part, and the basses will sing another part, and you don't want a soprano to try to sing the part of the bass, or vice versa. And even more, in good music, you don't usually have all 4, sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. You don't have all 4 singing every part of every song all the time. No, good music has pauses. A soprano or an alto, they have to rest their voice in the middle of the piece sometimes. So not every voice has to sing all the time, and certainly every voice doesn't have to have the same call to action. So they should have an action that they want to do, and give them a menu of choices. But and the choices of action should be soon. Sometimes it can be as simple as, here's the phone number for the state representative or for the federal. I put it up on the board and say, get out your iPhones and let's all text them right now, or let's all call them right now. And then probably the most important part of a call to action is getting a commitment to take the action. So there have been studies on this that if you can get the commitment contract, I'm going to do this on Tuesday, that they're more likely to do it than if you get them to say, yeah, that's a good idea. So really try to get them, a date or a lock-in, or maybe even have them sign a card or secure the commitment as part of the call to action. So there's 4 parts, But you need to think about how you're going to get from one to the next. What are the, I think of them as on-ramps and off-ramps. How do you bridge these? You don't want to say, okay, part two now. You don't want to do that. You want to have a fairly continuous flow. So I tried to do that a little bit. You remember, I didn't just jump into comfort zones. I told you sort of a personal story about a comfort zone. So I viewed that as an on-ramp to the discussion of comfort zones. I don't know if it worked, but that was sort of my thinking. In more practical for what we're doing, you could, sort of explain who you are with a little anecdote and say, and this is why this is so important to me or to all of us. So we all have had stories like this. This is why it's so important, which takes us to, but the good news is, don't worry. We actually know, I'm not just telling you this to rile you up. We know how to do, we know how to get past this. And most importantly, if this is not just a hobby to you, if this is serious to you, here's what you need to start doing. So these parts should not all be equally timed. The opener and intro, I couldn't make the box get smaller, I'm sorry, and stay readable. The opener and the intro should be the shortest of the sections, absolutely. I would, 2 minutes, certainly no more than 5 minutes, maybe 30 seconds, depending on how much time you have. Some anecdote, some story, my grandfather sold shoes, and that's why this isn't just a shoe factory. This is, something that makes this personal and motivational real. Problem statement, of course, can be a bit bigger. Most of your time, though, should be on the last two sections, on solutions and calls to action. So, slides. I'm using slides. There's some very important tips about slides. The first is PowerPoint is not Word. One of my favorite pet peeves. PowerPoint is not Word. So in PowerPoint, in general, you want to use no more than 6 lines of text. No more than 6 lines of text if you can. And I'm one of these nitwits that if you have a dense slide, I'm not going to hear what you're saying because I'm going to be literally counting the number of lines on your, I literally do that when I'm bored. I count the number of lines of text, and sometimes it's like, huge. What size font? You don't want to use a tiny font, a 10-point font, 12-point. Go no smaller than 20-point, unless it's the footnote, and then you can explain. You don't need to read the footnote. It's just there so I can read it to you if you need it. Other than the footnote, you should never go smaller than 20 points. 28 points, this is a 28-point font, and it's pretty readable. If you're putting things on your slides that are so small that nobody can read, if you find yourself wanting to say, I know you can't read this, but, well, then you screwed up. You shouldn't put it up there, unless the whole point is this is dense and confusing. But if you're putting something on a slide and you're inclined to say, I know you can't read this, that's your mistake. Fix it. That's a 20-point font, and you can see how small that is. You don't want to go any smaller than that, almost never. And don't worry about grammar. The grammar police aren't going to be coming by, even in St. Louis, the grammar police don't come by and tase you. You don't have to have full sentences. You don't have to have periods after a sentence. Just have the message that's distilled down to the least that it can be. So there are 3 exceptions to what I'm saying. The first is in a legal format. If you're like giving a testimony someplace where the slides will then be used as witness later on, then be very careful. Use sentences, get grammar right. Don't worry about the font size as much. If you're speaking to legislators, again, be neurotically careful about it. And if you're giving a webinar, people can actually get up close and read if they need to. So those are what I would consider exceptions to it. If you want to put a lot of words on a slide, that's what Word is for. If you're making paragraphs, if you're writing a book, use Word for that. Don't try to turn your slides into these dense things that have 3,000 words on them. Break them apart in multiple slides if you need to. If you're using a laser, that means you've got a problem with your slides. You should not be using a laser. Don't use the laser. So if you noticed on this slide when I showed you this, that box on the left that's in the yellow square around it, I drew a yellow square around that slot, that image, because I knew, I planned, I knew what I wanted to talk about. I knew that was the part of this slide I wanted to call your attention to. So I didn't need a laser. I planned it. I made a yellow box around it appear when I wanted to call your attention to it. If you're using a laser, number one, if I'm using a laser how am I going to use a laser right now? That would be weird, and that wouldn't work. If you're giving us a talk where you've got 3 screens behind you because it's a big room, which one do you look at with the laser? And the laser, it's just not, skilled. On the other hand, if people come up to you and tell you that they really love your special effects or, whatever, if people say that, you're also making a mistake, because you want the effects to be subtle. You only want to use an effect if you really have a reason to. You don't want to do crazy fly-ins and fly-outs and scroll-ups and boom noises. You want your special effects to be unnoticed, frankly. You can use them in a sophisticated way, but they should be unnoticed. And really, I'm a slide junkie for all sorts of reasons that I'll spare you. But some really powerful speakers don't use slides at all. So I don't know if you've ever seen sort of the standard sort of PNHP, talking slideshow where there's, literally 100 or 200 150 slides in an hour. Don't feel like you need to do that. Don't actually ever do that. But certainly, don't feel like you have to live up to the showing, all these slides. That's way too many things. And frankly, some of the most powerful speakers that I know have gotten away from slides at all. They just frankly expose themselves with their personal story, and it's far. So if that's you, don't think you need to use slides at all. But do be prepared. So be sure. First thing, be sure you have the right time and place. Learn from my mistake about that. Always be sure you have the right, and it's particularly important if you're going to a college campus. I don't know if you've done many college campus talks, but oh my gosh, there's no street addresses. There's 2 buildings with the same name. College campuses, to me, they're the most frightening places to find the right room in. So if you're going to a campus, really study that map. Make sure you know which building and stuff, or maybe even say, hey, I'll meet you on the northwest corner of 6th and Green, and can you kind of just walk me there? So really be sure you know the time and place when you're going to it. Be sure that the equipment is solid. So, don't forget your laptop. I did that once. Drove to Florida to give a talk, and left my laptop here in St. Louis. Actually had to have a neighbor break into my house. I gave him the code to the garage and box it up and mail it to me, so it worked out fine. But don't forget the important things. So I did that. Have your laptop. Make sure you've got all the right cords and adapters, because every system, if you're going to connect to somebody else's system, who knows what they've got. Have one of these gadgets. It's like $20, I think. And it's so much easier, but don't use the laser. But have one of those. Have your own projector if you can, because you don't know what you're walking into. If you can have your own projector, that's better. What about the screen? I have a good screen that I carry around with me when I'm driving. I don't know how many times somebody has said, yeah, we have a screen. And, and they said, oh yeah, it's a great big screen. I went to one place, it was about a 3-hour drive, and I did bring my own screen. But they had said they had a nice big screen. It was a big room. It was like a 200-person gymnasium that was all filled with chairs. The big screen was just a pretty good-sized, HD TV screen. So thank goodness I didn't trust them. Don't trust anyone, no matter what they say. I actually had a pastor sound like he knew exactly how the equipment would work. He said, he used letters like HDMI with me. We had this conversation that, if I bring my laptop, I can just plug it in to the HDMI cord in his church and we'll be ready to go. And I get to his church and he says, so do you have your screen with you? And I did, because I don't even trust a pastor. I didn't trust anyone, but I did. But he wanted my screen because we weren't in the room that has the HDMI hookup. So be as autonomous as you can be, and get as much good clarity about it as you can. Bring an extension cord. It's unbelievable how useless your laptop and projector are if you don't have it. Sometimes you might be 30 feet away from the nearest electrical outlet. So I've got a nice long extension cord that can take actually three devices can plug into it, and it's a three prong on that side, and I've got a 3 to 2 prong adapter to plug it into if the electrical outlet in the house doesn't work. So do that. So bring a 3-plug adapter, and have all the supportive tools. Your laptop might choose that day to die. Who knows what'll happen. So I try to have a backup plan. I usually put my presentation on a thumb drive that I have in my pocket just as a backup, and I hope somebody there, or sometimes I'll arrange somebody to have a backup laptop. I'll have sometimes, if I'm not confident, I'll even print it on paper so I have something to go with. Bring your own clock, manage your own time. Be sure you have a way of telling time. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. Have a couple leave behinds. Don't turn this is my bias, but I hate it when speakers turn the room into a bookstore. When you have a table that's got 30 pamphlets and 30 articles all copied and all sitting out there. Number one, that's really expensive. Number two, it's a pain in the butt to carry it around. And number three, there are bookstores. There is an internet. People can get this stuff. If people pick up 30 handouts from you, they're doing that to be nice to you. They're not going to sit home and spend 2 days doing an intensive read of your materials. But figure out the one or two that really say what you care about, what you most want to be sure they get. Bring those. Leave behinds are good. People like leaving feeling like they have something to show for it. Be sure that anything that you bring has your contact information so that they can get a hold of you. They know where to go to your website or your Facebook or a page or what have you. And be sure you get email signups. Frankly, the secret mission of giving a public talk is to garner new contacts. So don't waste that. Businesses pay a fortune for every new contact that they get. So you're speaking in public, do your best to get signups. Ask your host if that's okay. It's almost always okay, but ask for permission for that. And have business cards. It costs $10 to get 500 business cards. So, have business cards with your contact information with you. Bring all that stuff with you. And don't worry if this checklist sounds overwhelming and you're thinking, I can't remember all that. I wasn't expecting you to. This list is in the middle of the presentation. You're not going to remember this part of the conversation. We're at the bottom, remember? But you'll have these slides and you can print out a checklist if you want to, so you'll be able to review it later. So on the day of the event, you want to manage yourself. That's the first person to manage, and I'm going to do that right now. Manage yourself. So, some people, remember reading someplace that coffee makes you a little bit smarter on the IQ test, so they'll drink like 3 extra cups of coffee before they go talk. Don't do that. My wife is really smart and she seldom comes to hear me talk because she hears me talk at home all the time. And one of the, I think 2 times that she came to hear me, I was sick. I think that's why she came. She was worried about me. So I had a cold. So before the talk, I thought, well, I can't talk like this. So I took, I think it was 240 milligrams of pseudoephedrine, a long acting. I took that right before, and I drank a couple of extra cups of coffee. And I was like, she says I was like Mr. Laser all over the place. It was dreadful. So be physiologically normal for you. If you normally have a glass of wine at 7 o'clock and the talk is at 9 o'clock, it's fine, have a glass of wine. But, do whatever is physiologically normal for you. No extra caffeine, for example. Get there early, get there at least, I'm neurotic. I go for an hour early for almost all of my talks. Be at least 30 minutes early, particularly if you have to do the setup. So get there early enough that the room's not yet crowded and full, and you can make sure that the AV works, and then you can relax. And then when you're nice and relaxed, you can mingle. And that's not just a social nicety. You want to really kind of use this. So pretend that you're the host. Pretend that you're at your house. You're in your house. And there's all these people that have shown up, and you don't know most of them. So you want to greet them. So mingle like you're the host. Welcome them, tell them you're glad they're there. Act like you own it, even though you're sort of an invited speaker in somebody else's group, but act proud to be there and ask questions. Don't go on, don't do your talk. Don't start into your spiel. Don't get on a soapbox. Ask questions. Figure out more about your audience. And figure out where they're coming from. Ask them what they're thinking about. Ask them why did you come tonight? Why did you decide why are you here? And my favorite answer I once got was, well, I want to hear the other guy talk. He looks pretty interesting. Okay, I can't help you with that. But listen carefully what they tell you, and maybe you'll hear 1 or 2 or 3 quotes that you can throw back, sprinkle in your conversation, in your presentation, and say, well, I know some of you, like Mary over there, are concerned about such and such, so listen carefully for quotes, do some of your quadrant work so you can try to get a sense of the crowd, but listen, you'll be speaking plenty soon, and manage your message. This is not your only rodeo. It's a mistake I've seen newbies do this a lot, where they've got tons of information. They've been, God, I'm like 45 years old, they're thinking, and nobody's ever asked me to speak in public before, and now you know how, I got to tell them what Harry Truman says about, and you've got like 300 things you want to download, to the, don't do that, don't. This is not your only rodeo, and you don't want it to be your only rodeo. You want to, be invited back. You want to come and do more talk. You want to continue this. You want to pace it. You want to undensify it. So don't try to pack more in than you have reason to, and stay on message. If you want to go into a story about Harry Truman, there darn well better be a reason how Harry Truman connects back to the specific message of your talk. He's a really interesting president. He's from Missouri, can talk about him for a lot. Only if he's relevant to the specific message. So stay on message. Diversions aren't bad, but they have to be pointed. They have to have a purpose. So the day you're there, think about the room setup. You actually can, not always, but sometimes, most of the time, frankly, have a big impact on how the chairs and tables are arranged. So here's how this last one was set up. There's the speaker is the little green dot on the front left, and then the screen is that big black bar across the top, and then there's a projector in the middle, and the speaker is sort of trapped behind the podium, and then all the chairs are lined up. It's a lecture hall, basically. So you are as far away from the audience with barriers between you and the audience as you can. At a minimum, you want to try to get away from that podium. Certainly if you're comfortable, try to stand in front of the podium, closer to the screen, or even get rid of the podium if you can. So that's what he did. He didn't accept that he had to stay trapped behind the podium. He moved over there. So that's the sort of the most structured way to set up a room. And then this is a way that you often find you're in too, right? Where there's a conference table and they've got you and your laptop perhaps at the one end, and then the screens at the other end. I call this torticollis de PowerPoint. For those of you who aren't physicians, torticollis is this frozen neck thing where you've sort of stiff neck essentially kind of thing. And that's what happens in this setting, torticollis de PowerPoint. People don't know, should I be looking at the speaker? Should I be looking at the slides? No, I'll look at the speaker. No, the speaker should look at this. It's a terrible arrangement. So obviously you don't have to settle for that. If you have your clicker, even if the laptop is at the foot of the table, you can move to the head of the table. So you can choose, where to stand. And of course, if you do that, you probably want to try to get rid of the first two seats, have them repositioned so that they're not trapped. So think about the room setup. This is one of the best arrangements if you want to have interaction. So if you want the group talking to each other, and you don't always want that, but if you do, that sort of arrangement, and again, you don't have to stand up at the screen, you can stand right in the middle, and you can walk back and forth a little bit. So think about the room setup. You actually have an impact on that. Your first impression matters. Your first 30 seconds matter. Remember, these folks have lots of other things they could be doing with their time right now, and you want to make sure that you're the thing they want to do. So it's very tempting to spend several minutes thanking so-and-so, thanking so-and-so. When I was a kid, we had a friend of the family that would call up, and the first 3 minutes of every phone call were, "Hi, how are you? How's your mother? How's your father? Thank you that," and my God, it was horrible. You're going to a presentation, and yeah, it's nice to say thank you to the host, of course, because you actually genuinely are grateful, but don't spend any longer than that. They didn't come here to hear you thank people. They came here to, don't feel like you have to, hey, how about the weather? Figure out your first opener and use it. And the first opener can be a pause. You can use a pause. You can, the host says, and now, so-and-so is going to start speaking, and you're standing there, and it's okay to stand there briefly, and pause, make them think, what the hell's going on? What's he going to do? Breathe, make eye contact, look at a few people. Don't even say a word, and it will unnerve them and get them what's going on, get their attention a little bit. You don't want to use it every time, but it's a tactic. Open with a line like, I'll bet you're asking yourself. This is using second person pronouns, which we talked about, I think, last time. So I'll bet you're asking yourself. That kind of an opener can get people thinking, yeah, I am asking myself, even if they weren't. I do ask myself that. So try to really engage in the first 30 seconds. Have an agenda? you want to know where you're going, but it's not a rigid work plan. So you want to go through it a little bit, like I said, and get their permission, and you want to manage expectations so that they know where you are up to a point. I used to, for a while, early on, I would actually make an agenda. Here's the 6 things we're going to talk about, and I would then have it as a corner of as a tiny quadrant of the slide, and I would have an arrow march along so they could see, oh, he's on part 3 now. So they could actually see, and that's like the stupidest thing I could have done. Number one, they're sitting there thinking, oh my God, he's only on part 3, so a little bit too rigid. If you notice, my slides don't have page numbers. I don't put page numbers on my slides because when I'm looking at somebody's slides with page numbers, occasionally I'll glance at it and go, seriously, there's like 40 slides already? How many slides is this guy gonna make me look at? So, manage expectations, have a story arc that you kind of sketched out at the beginning, but don't make it so granular that they're actually, oh man, once we're gonna march through this. Don't wanna be quite that rigid. Remember, this is a performance. Think of it like music, but that means you don't wanna go to a piano concert and first have to sit through the tuner getting out on the stage, and maybe you do, it's kind of interesting actually, but you don't wanna do that. You want the concert performer to get on the stage and start playing the darn music. That's what you're there for. Start the music. This is kind of the same as no small talk and minimal thinking, but pretty quickly use your opening line, maybe a pause, but open up and do the topic. Don't tune the piano. Figure out that opening line. I'm kind of weak at that, but some of my friends are much better at that. Think through what's the first sentence, and really kind of weigh several options for that. And I'm not even going to tell you what this last bullet point says. So don't do this kind of stuff, right? I don't know how many times I've been to lectures where somebody says, the first thing they say to me is, I'm sorry, there's just so much material here, so I'm going to go as fast as I can, and I may not get to the end. No. If it's in, you decide. Don't put the, I don't know what I'm missing. Don't do that. I actually went to a class where they did this, where I was taking a class on this topic, and the speaker started off by saying, I'd much prefer to talk to you about that, but they wouldn't let me talk to you about that. So I'm going to talk to you about this, and it's a good topic, but it's really not what I'm paying. No, if you've said you're going to talk about this, talk about this. I don't even know these slides. This isn't my talk. This is Bob's talk. And he asked me to talk about it, so, I'm going to we're going to get through this together. Don't worry. No, they didn't come here to get through something with you. They came here to have you edutain them, so own it if you agreed to it. I know you can't see this. We've already talked about that. And this is like announcing, hey, I know I look like an adult. I'm actually not an adult. I can't tell time. I have no idea what time it is. So I want one of you here to be sure to tell me when we're kind of getting low on time. If you've been pacing yourself properly, you've known the time all along. Don't ask somebody else. Have a clock. I've got a clock right there, actually, that I'm looking at from time to time. I know exactly where we are. When you do stuff like that, this is how I feel. I just feel like, man, the kids are like crazy in the pantry, and let me out of here. That's not what I want. I want dinner. I don't want to have to look in your kitchen with your kids crawling around it. I want a nice meal when I come to hear you talk. I want it to have characteristics that I enjoy. I want it to fill me up. And I want it to kind of have me appetized to think, I want to go back there. I want some more of this stuff. So don't take me into your kitchen. This is the third time for me to mention my wife. So she invented this acronym, BOSS IT. So it's a pretty interesting, she heard me talk a few times, on videos, and she came up with this acronym. She said I need to boss it. First, breathe, it's okay to breathe, take a pause, open with a pause. Do the Obama, breathe, it's okay, it's good. A little bit of silence, it's okay. Own it. I used to have little jokes that I thought were hilarious, but I didn't want to distract, so I would have little comments, sort of asides, and I would make a quick little one-liner thing sort of in the middle of a conversation that I would keep on going. And then she pointed out to me that either say it or don't say it. If you're gonna say it, if you have a joke, or if you have a concept, stew in it for a little bit. Let them, you have to own it, and let your audience really stew in it so they can understand what it is you're saying. If you're gonna say it, own it. Have it be yours with some ownership. Don't just kind of make it don't have any throwaway lines, because you know why they're called throwaway lines. And then slow down. If you're me, you need to slow down. Interestingly, according to public speaking trainers, most speakers need to speed up. It's not my experience, but that's what so think about your pace at any rate. And for me, it's slowing down. But for some people, it's slowing up and simplify. Simplify, simplify, simplify. You know, I guess I could have just said that once, but simplify. Think about the details, right? So think about what you're wearing. So you want to be dressed at least as nice as the people in your audience. This is perhaps my bias. You want to be dressed at least as nice as your audience, in the same general tone as your audience, so that just by looking at you, they think you're in your tribe. We talked about tribes last time. So just the way you dress, me in your tribe, and maybe one notch higher, maybe one notch better dressed than they are, so that there's almost this little hint of a hierarchy. You don't want to show up, you know, one notch below them. Some folks can pull that off. I know speakers who can really pull off showing up in clothes that I would feel uncomfortable with. But so think about your clothing. Think about that, and move by intent. You know, don't be doing this. You know, don't be doing that. You know, when people start doing this, you know, when you've seen speakers do this, here's what I'm thinking. When I'm seeing somebody do this, I'm actually trying to calculate the height, their height, based on the periodicity of their sway. I'm trying to do don't do that. You know, if you have a mannerism like that, you're going to be really distracting. You know, I just exaggerated it, but move by intent. Sometimes if I want to contrast two concepts, I'll have one on my slide on this side and another one on my slide on the other side. And then when I'm speaking, if I have a lavalier or a handheld mic, when I'm speaking, I will actually make a point to walk to the right-hand side of the stage, and then make that point, and then put up the next point that's on, and put it on the left-hand side of the stage, and I'll walk over to the other side of the stage. And if you do that a lot, you'll be distracting. But if you use walking across the stage occasionally with intent, it can be powerful. So should you walk around if you're a pacer? Should you walk around? Or if you're not a pacer, should you make yourself pace? They've actually studied that. There's evidence about this. Does pacing, does standing still or walking around impact recall or impact your ability to sway an audience? No, not at all. So if you like to pace, pace away. If you like to stand still, stand still. I'm just saying move in general by intent. Be thoughtful about it. Don't do that's very distracting to people. Don't do any of that. And use pronouns intentionally. You know, we talked about second person pronouns, and you know this, right? You know the second person pronouns are really powerful. And I think we dug that into the ground last time. I won't do it again. Pauses we mentioned. You know, I have a friend who is really good at repeating himself when he wants to make a point. When he wants to make a point. When he wants to make a point, he'll repeat himself. He'll say the thing 3 times. And you know to take Milton seriously if he said it 3 times. 3 times. So, you know, you don't want to do that a lot. It can be very annoying. But once in a while, if you want to emphasize something, say the same thing word for word 3 times. You'll see some people on TV do that sometimes too. And don't just whisper so that I can't hear you. Use your outdoor, project. Does anybody there know what an APM is? Well, I can't see you, so I can't tell. So APMs, track your APMs. Those are actuallys per minute. And I came up with that because I had a guy that I used to work with who, this is a direct quote. He said this on stage. He said, I actually find that this is actually an important point, actually. He actually said that, those words. And I heard him speak many times, and I developed this APM count. And I would listen to him for 10 minutes, and I stopped hearing his content. I was just hearing, and I was listening for the actuallys. Once you notice the mannerism, it's all you can see. So I started actually tracking his actuallys, and I would give him a report. Hey, you were down to a 12 APM. Pretty good. You were at 15 last, So if somebody does that to you, if somebody points out you've got a mannerism like that, don't be offended. Don't get defensive. Thank them, because most people won't tell you that, but they will have noticed it. So if somebody points it out to you, thank them. But then what do? You know, I didn't help this guy because I didn't know the trick. There's a trick to make yourself stop doing that, and that's attenuate it, overkill it. So what he should have done was to have the word actually go through several minutes actually, where actually is actually, the actually second actually word, actually every actually time, actually that, actually he actually says, actually any actually word. Overkill it. Make yourself sick of that word. And if you find out that you've got that mannerism, burn it out by doing something like that. Be really careful with humor. Be really careful with humor. Be really careful with humor. It's a narrow target surrounded by a big motive, not funny. A friend of mine, Larry Zarin, said that. You can't excise humor. If you tend to do humor, I'm not saying to excise it from your talk, because then you'll be bored and you'll convey that, but be really careful about humor. Aside from, my gosh, don't do anything, you know, inappropriate with humor. But an awful lot of humor is, you know, inside jokes, not funny. So be very limited with that. Of course, you know the answer to this. It's practice, practice, practice. How do you practice? Toastmasters. I confess I've never been to Toastmasters, but I have heard many friends of mine who vouch for it. And you can join it. It's not terribly expensive, $65, and you're in for a year, I guess, and you have access to this whole wealth of resources, including the one that I really want to call your attention to, the presentation mastery, which includes a whole series of a group getting together and having an assignment, and it's a speak for 2 minutes in front of the group about a topic that they assign you, and you practice over and over again giving your talk, and the group critiquing you. It's a safe space. The topic is one you don't care about. The people in the room know that. Maybe you do care about the topic from time to time, but it's a safe way to get past the skill, and they give you lots of training. So I confess I've not been to Toastmasters, but it's all over the world. It's certainly in every city in the United States. So where should you go speak? You should speak first in places, if you're starting, speak in places that are, like, you know, okay to speak at. Host your friends, right? You know, have your friends on Zoom or whatever. You know, try a faith-based. They tend to be more supportive. These are groups that tend to be more supportive and open and not quite as threatening. So start in a few of these venues, but be wary of the next group, because they can surprise you. You might think these are going to be easy ones too, but they can surprise you. So Democratic clubs sometimes are some of the more difficult ones. They're not all aligned with what you're trying to talk about. Retirees may have a whole set of questions that you may not have anticipated. If you're going to talk to doctors, this is in rank order, where they are the friendliest to a bit less friendly to the topic. So mental health providers tend to be the most aligned with what we're saying. Hospital staff is a little bit more surprising sometimes. The issues are a little bit different. And unions, I've given, I think, like 580 talks. I've been thrown out of 2, or I walked out of one and was thrown out of one. And the one I was thrown out of was a retiree labor group. So unions can be kind of tough sometimes. Usually they're your friends, but you know, you might be surprised. And be ready for this last group. You know, don't start in this last group. Don't start by giving grand rounds to surgery. So you've got to, you know, you've been giving your talks a few times. There's an anesthesiologist who really likes your thing. They agree with you. You know, they want to bring you into anesthesia grand rounds. That is not the first place to go. I'm here to tell you, that's not the first. You know, tell them thank you. You know, but get your chops built up before you go in there. You know, medical associations, some of them, you know, are supportive. You know, I guess some of you are from California, places where it's maybe different than here in Missouri, but it's, you know, it's different everywhere you go. And then some of these clubs might be very supportive, might be quiet, or it might be great. And then lastly, of course, sort of the forbidden fruit. I've tried to get into these, but I've not made it yet. Okay, Zoom or other teleconferencing setups. So notice I'm using this slide as an on-ramp to it. So Zoom, teleconferencing tips. First, you know, just because you're at home doesn't mean that it's okay to, you know, have your swimming trunks on. You know, dress appropriately. You know, that means clean. That means not distracting. That means non-strobing. You don't want to wear a shirt. This doesn't do it, I don't think, but a shirt with a very small pattern, a very tiny sort of herringbone-ish pattern sometimes. If you're not a very high-resolution TV or a high-resolution camera, that'll strobe on the camera, and it'll be very distracting. And if you watch TV, you'll notice that some people dress like that, and their shirt is strobing because they didn't think that part through. So dress appropriately, practice all the tricks. Mike was nice enough to practice screen sharing in breakout rooms with me before we started. Don't toggle your video on and off. Have your video on. If you're going to have your video off, you may as well be on the phone. And we know how dreadful group conference calls are. So don't turn your video off. Don't think, while I'm doing this talk, I'm in this meeting, I'll turn my screen off just for a minute because I'm going to go. No, try really not to do that. People are going to be wondering where you are. Have your lighting. Hopefully, the lighting that you can see me from is better than if it were, down here. Think about where the lighting is. Try it out. Have a nice, clean, undistracting background. Don't have chaos behind there. And it's okay to have notes. Actually, if you have notes, that sort of shows that you prepared. But don't have your notes over here, right? You don't want to be talking and then looking over there, and you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to, or even just, I'll trick them. I'll look here, but I'll glance with my eye, the side eye, or pull a Marco Rubio with the water. Try to minimize the amount of time that you're looking away from the screen. Try not to do that. Have your camera. Don't do that. Oh my God, I shouldn't have put that up there. I thought I took it out. Have your camera at eye level. My laptop right now is on a box so that it's elevated enough so that my camera is at eye level. It's called body language. It's not called head language. So I'm picking on Ed Schultz right now because he's passed away, as you may know, but he was the master of screwing this up in my book. There's a picture of him. That's how most talking heads look, but he liked to do this a lot. That's pretty annoying, right? And when I first did my first couple teleconferences, I thought I would do that too, because the rest of it's all noise. It's face. I want you to see my face really well. I want to be. I want to see your face really well. There have been studies on this, and if everybody on the conference call has their face right up at the monitor, it's really fatiguing. It's Zoom fatigue, because then you're missing all of the other cues. Don't do that. Try to step back a little bit, as I am right now. Or if you notice in TED Talks, they're way back, right? They're way back, but you do have to wear pants if you're going to go way back there like that. It takes me to my last point. This book, TED Talks, it's a really easy book to read, and it's from the people that make TED Talks, and it's got a wealth of information. If you're going to read one book to try to improve your presentation style, this is the book. It's really phenomenal. And here's just one quote from it. They said that the number one advice they give to speakers is to make regular eye contact with members of the audience. Be warm, be real, be you, unless you're arrogant and self-centered, then pretend to be somebody else. So don't be afraid, you can do this. That's my talk. We still have a couple of minutes. What happened? There we go. Hello.
Wow, thank you so much.
2 minutes for discussion, don't we?
So when you told me...
I can't hear anybody. Oh, wait, it's me. It's not you, it's me.
Yeah, well.
There we go.
When you mentioned a story arc, I was like, oh, what's a story arc in a presentation like this, And I'm very impressed. You demonstrated it while telling about it. Thank you.
It's the hardest part, right? That's the hardest part, because this talk is one that I actually haven't given for like a year. It's been a year since I gave it. So I looked at it, and the stuff I had from a year ago was dated. It wasn't as, I thought I could do better. So I disassembled it, and I wound up, 3 days ago, it was a basket of beads. And I spent the last 3 days trying to figure out what's the arc, where is the arc? And that to me sometimes is the hardest thing. So when I started this by saying, we're going to talk about preparing to speak, the day of the talk, and then how you actually speak, maybe with Zoom. That was my attempt to try to collect it. And I juggled the slides all the time. I moved them all around every which way to make it flow. So I'm glad that you think it worked. So thank you.
Great. So was this recorded so that those of us who missed it get a chance to watch?
Yes, it's recording. It is still recording.
Okay. Thanks.
Everybody say how great it was.
Great.
Thank you.
It was great.
Yeah.
I love how energetic your voice is too. That's you didn't comment on that so much, but that's part of being engaged. Is you sound like it's a really exciting topic, so that makes it even more exciting.
You know, thank you. I think that's actually one of the important characteristics. You know, I should probably put this in, but I think it's important for a speaker to, number one, think the topic is important. Number two, think their students are able to learn the topic. And number three, think the topic is important to their students. You know, you have to convey those three components. And if you have those guiding you, you can do almost anything. I think sometimes I'm too enthusiastic, though. I think that's fatiguing.
I think that on Zoom, it's better to err on the side of being more enthusiastic, because it is really harder for people. They don't have your whole body language, and it's like these little tiny squares. So, yeah, no, I think you hit it perfectly.
Thanks.
So Ed, have you done teaching separate from your practice? This is Chuck talking. Have you done teaching on your own in your own right, or this is your?
Well, my life before my involvement in PNHP was I spent 8 years as chief medical officer at Express Scripts, which turns out to be a job primarily in sales. So, and I didn't fully expect that, but Express Scripts, as you know, is a Fortune now 50 or something company. I was really deep into the dark side of the force. This is part of my atonement tour. Me and Wendell says that.
You're
too.
not alone. You're not alone.
I know. But my point of bringing up Express Scripts was that they're a large organization that takes their public presentations really seriously, and they do an incredible amount of training about how to speak in public. So a lot of the things that I was saying tonight actually was content that I jujitsu'd away from the dark side of the force. Not all of it, but a lot of the stuff that we would spend, I mean, it's up to days and days and days of time, us all sitting around giving a presentation, and then the rest of the group making the speaker feel like crap because they showed all the things that you didn't do right.
Right.
Tons of time doing that, and it's painful, right. But I think it helps. The point of that is that most folks can't go to Express Scripts to do that, but it's really worthwhile to get some friends who you tell ahead of time, for the next hour, I'm going to have really thick skin, and I want you to tell me the worst things you can about how you're genuinely reacting to this, and because I want to get better, and I want you to be brutally honest. So ask some friends that you trust that you can let your guard down with, and even do some video recordings of yourself. You know, I have this degree from the American College of Physician Executives, actually, where they had us they taught public speaking. They had us video record ourselves, and watching yourself on camera is pretty humbling. You know, and you'll see things that you had no idea you were doing. So those are two things that help.
But don't show it to your spouse. Don't show it to your spouse.
Oh, she's seen it all.
They're the worst critics.
You know, yes, but I've gotta say it's the most. She gives me the most painful feedback I ever get, and it's true. But oh my God, it's the most useful feedback I ever get. You know, she has no problems insulting me if she wants to, but it's. But I know that there's this love there, and it's, you know, and it's like so friggin' obvious.
She's only trying to.
And she really does, you know. So yeah, be thoughtful of whether or not you want to show it to your spouse. But I would say go for it, you know. But then if they say things that make you really mad, don't get defensive. Don't say, well, you know, I didn't do that. I didn't mean that. Well, you just don't understand. Don't do any of that crap. Just force yourself to sit there. Force yourself to maybe echo it back.